We are walking through these 8 statements called the Beatitudes, and they show us where real blessing, real happiness can be found, and yet they're, to be honest, inside out and upside down from what we might ever think could be the case. And last week we heard the happiest man to ever walk on the face of the earth, Jesus, tell us, blessed are the poor in spirit, and he's saying it's a good thing when we admit that spiritually speaking, we don't match up to what God's standard is for us and what he intends for us. It's a blessing to come to that point, to come to the point where we come to the end of our spiritual life so we can begin a new life with him. And today we're going to see another inside out, upside down concept that Jesus offers people. And it's just as hard to understand, really. I mean, in terms of the culture that we're in. Over the last several months, people of faith have been asking, how do I, as a believer in Jesus Christ, respond to the unprecedented events that are unfolding in our world? I mean, most of us have lost something. Some of you have lost a lot. This virus started to rage in late February, and it shut down our lives, and we thought, boy, I can't wait till summer when this is all behind us. Then summer stretched out into fall, and fall into the winter, and here we are today still saying, is there any end to this thing? As the most vengeful and hateful political cycle in modern history seemed to stabilize to some extent last February after the unsuccessful attempt of the impeachment of the president, America thought, well, let's just get on with the business at hand. Let's get back to the business of the people. Washington, just focus on what the important things are now. But after a summer of cities burning and a fall that had an incredibly ugly campaign and accusations of voter fraud, and then, of course, what happened on Wednesday, we're still asking the question, will there ever be an end to this? And I think really more importantly right now, the question for us should be, how does our leader want us to respond to these circumstances, to these hard and hateful, discouraging times? And here's what he says. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Okay, does that sound right to you? I mean, on the surface, based on how our world works, in your experience, do you want to join a movement where the supreme leader starts out with these 2 ideas? You'll find happiness with spiritual poverty, and you're going to find happiness when you actually mourn. I mean, if you really wanted a following, if you're Jesus, wouldn't you lay out some pretty hefty slate of political promises? I mean, wouldn't you say to the crowd back then, hey, blessed are you if you choose me, because I'm going to bring you security. I'm going to bring you a stimulus check that's going to help you get over the hump. Because if you follow me, I'm going to give you the best job you could possibly have, or I'm going to give you the freebies, free health care, free education, free housing, free whatever free you want. I mean, I'm going to get that for you. If you follow me, I'm going to heal our nation, and I'm going to make us what we once were, the greatest nation on earth, because at one time they were. In first century Syria, a huge crowd gathered. And honestly, many of them came for those kinds of promises. They had a loved one, or they themselves had been struggling physically, and they were hoping to be healed. Or they hadn't had a decent meal for several days, and they heard this guy can feed the masses. Or they were sick of what the Roman government had been doing to their people, and with all the taxation, all the brutality, and they said, we got to have a new approach to this, and this guy is maybe the leader to lead us into a new approach. But Jesus is no politician, friend. And right at the beginning, he says this to us and to them, blessed are those who mourn. Now, wait a minute. Could you think that they would have said, is that all he's got? I mean, speaking to thousands of people who lived in poverty, People who had no national health care. And really their medical support was really non-existent. People who had chronic unemployment. People whose next meal came because they went out and scratched something up that day. People who had lived as being an international disgrace for the last 500 years in history. Blessed are those who mourn. What does Jesus mean when he says mourn? Maybe that's it. Maybe the definition's something other than we think. No, not really. William Barclay says it's the strongest word possible for grief. He says the kind of grief that takes a hold and cannot be hidden. It's not just sadness. It's not just regret. It's not just frustration because you found out that the stimulus check was $600 and not $2,000. It's not the result of some bad day at school or on the basketball team or accidentally dropping your iPhone in the toilet and whatever you uttered right at that moment. It's not that. Those are annoyances. Certainly, we want to welcome those things or inconveniences, but a nice cup of hot chocolate or a good cry with a friend will probably take care of most of that. What is a blessed mourn? You live long enough, you'll face it. You'll walk through it. Something that will suck the very life out of you. The worst possible imaginable scenario unfolds. And it can come in different ways. It can come, first of all, from circumstances beyond your control. I mean, the tragic circumstances of life that you will never ask for, never hope for, never want. You would never want anyone else to go through. Quite frankly, you could never plan for it, and you never want to. The events that take us to the depths of our despair. We don't want them. We don't invite them. We don't welcome them. They just kick the door down and they say, here I am. What are you going to do now? Kyle Eilman, who's the author of some of this curriculum we're going through, said it's when your dream comes to an end. Circumstances beyond your control. And he calls them 6-word sagas. He asks if someone could give me 6 words, 6 different words telling their story, what would those words be? And then he lays out some. There has been a terrible accident. I'm leaving. The marriage is over. Your position's no longer needed. I just want to be friends. The cancer is not responding to treatment. You will not be able to conceive. Here's a rose from the casket. 6-word sagas where the dream ends, where the hope dies, where the nightmare becomes real, and you find yourself in this uncontrolled state of grief. I mean, how in whatever universe you find yourself in could such mourning lead to any blessing? It's a good question. I serve as a chaplain for Hall County, and it means that when I get a call from a dispatcher, it's either the police or it's the sheriff's department or it's the fire department, first responders. And it's never to chat, and it's never to schedule me for some event, and it's almost always after midnight. And it's a call that comes because a dream buster has thrust someone into a crisis so big they could never get through it on their own. And the call usually is like this. A baby has died. The mother is distraught. There's been a suicide. The family's waiting for you. There's been a tragic accident. The officers are wondering if you would go inform the family. Go with them. They always go. They're brave people. Will you go with them? And I'm driving to the scene and I'm always praying, God, you know this. You know I got nothing here. And the prayer always goes something like this. All I can bring is you. Give me a word. Give me something that can help this family in this tragedy. And I wish I had 3 tips. I wish I had just like this little brochure I could hand them and say, oh, it's going to be okay. Blessed are the mourn, for they will be comforted. I would never say anything like that at that moment. Why? It's impossible to believe it. Impossible to believe it. Someday you're going to see this as a blessing when I say that. Are you kidding me? On that day, no. On some day, they might say that, but not that day. The fact of the matter is that Jesus doesn't mess around. Jesus doesn't play with petty concerns. And when he tells us, blessed are those who mourn, he is talking about the kick me in the tail things in life that will destroy me if they don't make me better. When the circumstances are beyond my control, when life kicks me in the teeth and maybe somewhere else, and when I get smacked with the unimaginable, Jesus is right. There is nowhere to go but mourning, crying, despair of loss, to vent it with all the emotions that God put into my body. Mourn. And in those circumstances, it comes easy, like when life just throws something at us we weren't ready for. God help us all. But there's another time when mourning's appropriate, and that is when sin takes God out of control of your life. Things in my life that are well within my control that I let get out of control. So it's a blessing when I recognize that and when I come to a state of mourning over my sin. Now, here's the problem with that, and let's just be real. Culturally speaking, we have watered down the idea that sin means what it really means. I mean, in the New Testament language, in the Greek, there were 33 different words for sin. So apparently those people back then who had lifespans about half as long as ours, they had figured out, we got to deal with this sin stuff because it's going to kill us. So they were very introspective about it. And so they used other words like not just sin, but iniquity and transgression and turpitude and reprobate. I mean, pretty harsh words. But over the last 100 years or so, in our lifetimes for sure, we have discarded the concept. At least we've tried to. We favor, instead of sin, we say error in judgment. Unfortunate choices, slip-ups, boo-boos. Now, none of those do sin justice. I mean, let's put it this way. If I work hard in my company and I still lose a contract, that's not a sin. That's an error in judgment, or maybe it's a mistake I made that didn't fall through, or it could be that I just wasn't good enough in what I did to accomplish it, but it's not a sin. If I make a mistake and put salt in the cookie dough instead of sugar, that's not a sin, that's a boo-boo. I mean, if I make an investment choice and it doesn't profit, maybe it even loses money, which is probably, by the way, what will happen if I try that, that is not a sin, that is just an unfortunate choice. If I fall on the ice, I slip and I hurt myself, that's a slip-up, okay? Those words don't do sin justice. If my efforts fail, that's just failure. But here's another thing we've done with sin. We give it this word, disease. It brings this no-fault concept like, well, yeah, that's popular, right, to say addiction's a disease. Alcoholism, kleptomania, eating disorders, compulsive gambling, pornography abuse. Now, is sin addictive? There's no doubt about it. But once we buy into the idea that we are not sinners and we have no control over whatever takes over our lives, we have lied to ourselves. Should we treat compulsion like a disease? Maybe, if it helps, but it's not what it is. I mean, if sin is sin, whatever it takes, but the minute that I somehow say I'm not control over that, I don't have responsibility, then I lose. See, you can wipe sin from the vocabulary, but not from your soul. We can massage the definition, but the condition won't go anywhere if we do that. You want to get a start on getting control of your sin, then start to mourn it. Look at what it's doing to your life and start crying and mourning over, acknowledging, confessing, using sorrow and regret to your advantage. Because friend, when I come to the end of me, I will grieve sin. Without confession, there is no forgiveness. Jesus was in a circumstance where a woman who had lived a sinful life came and gave him a beautiful, beautiful gift. She anointed him with oil, and at that time that was a very precious thing. And there was a Pharisee there who questioned legitimately of her repentance. And Jesus made this statement. He said, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. And I have found this to be true. Maybe you have too. Maybe you've experienced this yourself. The happiest people on earth are those who are the most grateful people on earth are the ones who have come to grips with their sin, admitted it, grieved it, and moved beyond it, and now they have freedom from it. And by the way, they're the ones who offer freedom to other people. It's a great way to live if you'll live in it. It's amazingly liberating to admit that I have sin and to put it behind me. Because we put so much energy into hiding from it and denying it and running from it and delaying the consequences so that I can put it off till tomorrow. But when we stop running or we run out of places to run, that's when God does some marvelous stuff in our life. At that point, that's when mercy begins. Kyle Adelman talks about what a blessed mourn can accomplish. He gives 3 things. First of all, when you lose what you want, you can gain what you need. So often what we're doing is we're putting our dreams in these other things, and some of them are even good things, okay? I mean, when we have a great relationship, someone we love, a spouse, a child, a parent, a friend, and then we lose them, I mean, rightfully so, that brings grief. It brings mourning. But sometimes we've been putting too much into what we think we need in a person, and we lose out on what we really need from God. But God can show up in the midst of that loss, and usually what we need is his presence at that moment more than anything else. But that becomes very real when we realize how much we had put in the hands of other people to make us happy. Satan would love to use it to harm you, to lie to you, to cause you to weep. God can, if we'll let him, use it to teach us, to sharpen us, to give us lasting joy, and to give us hope for a future that's eternal, by the way. Here's another thing that a blessed mourn can accomplish. When you lose your dreams, you can gain God's vision. This is important. When our ideas of what we want out of life don't happen the way we dream they would, it can tend to wreck us. But sometimes in that space between expectation and reality, God will give me a new vision for what he wants from me and wants me to be, what he wants me to do. And we find out in time, if we're willing to trust him, he can make us something we never thought we could be. We can be, for instance, an emissary that takes hope to others who go through whatever we've struggled through. And are still struggling through, by the way. If you've lost someone very important to you, that doesn't just go away. The rest of your life, you'll at some level or another be missing that person because they're very important to you. Till you see them again in glory, you're going to miss them. But in the meantime, why waste that when there's other people around you who are in a fresher state of their grief? He gives you a vision for that. Here's another thing. When you lose your perfection, Eidelman says, you can gain God's grace. Because usually the first casualty to loss, whether it's from an event that was thrust on you or one that was caused by your own sinfulness, is that we realize we have far less control over things than we want to admit. I mean, I thought I could protect them. Now they're gone. I thought I could handle this myself, but it's destroyed me. I thought if I did all the right things, then wrong things couldn't happen. When we come face to face with our failures and mourn appropriately, then God has grace to operate because our pride has been taken away. And so as long as I live in self-sufficiency, how can I be dependent on God or anyone else? But when I lose what I want in life, and when my dream is shattered, and when I come face to face with my insufficiencies, that is when God comes in and he says, I'm here, and I've got more than what you need if you'll trust me. Ultimately, what comes from a blessed mourn? Comfort. That's what Jesus says. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. You know what that means? Comfort. It means pardon. It means peace. It means, for some people, restored purity. Purity that was sacrificed at the altar of self. It means freedom. It takes us beyond this life to eternity, where he says, I will wipe every tear away from your eyes. There'll be no more crying, no more mourning, no more pain. But in the meantime, I will walk with you in this life so I can help you navigate it when it comes. I want to show you just a portion of a unique story of a man who experienced both personal crisis and crisis from his own sin, and how God worked with him in that. Watch this.
Grew up in Long Beach, California. My parents separated when I was 7 years old. In terms of church, my mom was the one who took me. What I took in terms of faith and ran with was nobody's perfect. I'm going to live how I want. I'm going to try, quote unquote, as hard as I can, and it wasn't very hard. Ultimately, if I mess up, nobody's perfect. God's got me. And it kind of allowed me to have comfort in the afterlife and God and heaven and everything, but also my own life and my own will. What more could you want? I have God and I have me. That was my gospel. Ultimately, basketball was where my passion was. It was what I was the best at. So I stopped doing everything else outside of it. Everything about my life was basketball. What I was eating, or the relationships I had. If you're not with that, then you're not with that. You could see yourself to the door. It's just kind of how it was for me. My senior year, I was the guy for my college team and nationally recognized. It's kind of stereotypical. The higher I was going up in basketball, girls started coming. I took advantage of that. I did. Those were the perks. You're being recognized, you're being praised. I mean, the human approval aspect of it all. It was like a drug for me. It was a high, and I loved it. And I was living not just to succeed in basketball, but for people to like me. At that time, I'm dating my girlfriend. We were still at a place just doing our own thing. I've known this girl only a few months. She got pregnant. To me, that was the wind out of my sails, because I was like, that can't happen to me. Like, that invincibility factor was still right in my mind and in my heart. Fast forward a few months after signing that huge contract, I get to my first training camp, and as I'm going up to shoot the ball, out of nowhere, my hand just starts curling, kind of just like this. It curls like that. Every shot is doing the same thing. When I'm trying to catch the ball, my hand is curling right before I catch it. When I'm dribbling, my hand starts to just claw up when I'm dribbling, and I'm like, whoa, what is going on right now? God, enter God. What's going on? Can you help heal me? You got a miracle up there somewhere, so let's get me back on my own path, my own will, and I'll give you the few prayers that you need, and I'll be on my way. At that point, I was still going through the Bible and kind of what it was about, and the book of James. What really struck me was, you believe, you do well, even the demons believe and shudder. And I'm like, what is that all about? Okay. And I'm like, so there must be a difference between just mentally assenting to Christ and who he is and actually following him. I compartmentalized God, and it was him over here, and I got everything over here. And if I need you, I'll call on you. I wanted the comfort of the cross without the conviction. Obviously, it wasn't a proper understanding of kind of biblical grace. I didn't understand that truly following Christ was a turning of sin, a turning of my own will, and following him.
Landry and I have something in common. Our dreams were curtailed from the NBA by our injuries, so I can relate to that, but still hoping that dream will come true. But anyway, no, that's not really the case, you know that, but our dreams are curtailed when our sin and when unforeseen circumstances put a hold on them. Here's what I like what he said. I mean, there's a lot more to that interview. You can watch it in your small group if you're going through this curriculum, or you can get online and you can see it too. But here's what he says, really, really important. He says, I want the comfort of the cross without the conviction of my sin. Friend, that's not possible. That is not possible. There's a deep void that's created by what we lose. So we have another option. It's comfort from God, to be filled with what God has for us. And the more you come to the end of you, the more I come to the end of me, my hurt, my pain, that pushes me deeper into my faith. Deeper faith and hope that, eventually it's all going to be made right. But in the meantime, he can be working with me to bring right to me, to bring hope and opportunity and comfort. And as a matter of fact, if it's working the way it should, guess what that means? That I'm going to have opportunities with somebody else to bring comfort. One of my favorite passages in the Bible is 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3. It says, this is Paul writing to the church about the role of the church and Christians in life. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort. So that's what he offers us. Who comforts us in all of our troubles. That's what he wants to do. So that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from God. I mean, if you're going through some time of mourning and suffering, having lost someone who you've cared for so deeply that you hurt every time you think about it, the tears flow, here's what you need. You need someone to come alongside you to pray with you and help you. Maybe you're mourning what life has brought on you because of your own sin. And you've just never really dealt with that. You never said, that is who I am. I have made decisions. I have wrecked things. And I need help. Happy are those whose hearts break for what breaks God's heart. Why is that? Because they'll be comforted and they'll receive it. We're going to do something this morning we don't do here often, but once in a while we offer. And that's prayer for people who want to step forward and have prayer uttered on their behalf. And so we're going to go through our time of communion together, and then after that we're going to sing a little bit more. But at the end of this service, if you're a person, God's moving you today just to seek prayer, just, you're in some state of mourning. And it could be any of a number of things, but you just want someone to pray for you. It's as simple as that. We're not going to make any judgments. We're not going to ask you to tell your story. We're not going to ask you to confess anything you don't want to confess. Nothing like that. But you're just coming and saying, I need someone to pray for me. They'll pray for you this morning, and I'm confident they'll keep praying for you. So we're going to offer that towards the end of the service. Lord, in the meantime, we're going to commune. And in this communion, what we see very clearly is a God who brings comfort to those who need him. And you became very uncomfortable to make that happen. You talk about mourning. What was it like for you when your son died on that cross? What was it like for you when he lay in that grave? I'm confident you understand our grief. There's no doubt in my mind. What was it like for you when he rose out of that grave alive? I'm confident that the celebration in heaven was just as great as it will be when one of our loved ones wakes up anew with you in heaven, when we do ourselves. Lord, may this time be a time to reflect, to ask the question, has something knocked us for a loop in life that we've not been able to overcome? Is there something I've done in my life that I've not been able to get past because of my sin? To, Lord, lay that before you and to say, I'm not going to stay here. I'm not going to stay in this state of despair. No, I'm going to mourn and I'm going to receive comfort. Hopefully, I'm going to become one who comforts others. Jesus makes that possible. He said so. It's in his name we pray. Amen. It is an incredibly powerful moment when a person says and means those words. I need you. I need you, God. I've come to the end of me. You're my one defense. I mean, where else are you going to turn? I'm going to ask you right now, where else are you going to turn but him? Oh God, how I need you. comfort, hope begins with that blessed mourn. You know, the body of Christ exists to help each other in times of need, when their hurts and emotions are too great to bear. And like I said, we want to offer you that kind of support this morning. So there are going to be some men and women who will be at the front of the stage here at the end of the service. And if you want to join them for a moment of prayer, they'll be waiting for you. They'll pray with you. For some of you, that's admitting that you're hurting because of the sin of others, and it's just wrecked you. It might be that you're admitting that you have sin that you've allowed to wreck you and others. For some of you, it's that life has struck you with a major blow, and you don't know how to deal with it. And so you're just going to ask for help, for prayer, and you're going to reach out. And we welcome you for that. For some of us, anxiety is thick, and you just feel like you don't have hope. You don't know where to find support. And so what you're going to do is you're going to start here with prayer. You're going to move beyond the grief and say, I'm going to put this in God's hand. And to be honest, for some of you, you've already done some of the major work with God in grief. And now God's saying to you, I need to step up. And I need to let my grief help someone else. I don't know where God has you. But if you want to pray about it today, we're going to be here for you.